Hello, LinkedIn. Very excited to be here. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, good night if you're in the middle of the night. I don't know what time you're watching this. I do hope in a comfortable hour for wherever you're watching. It's my pleasure to have with us today another great guest for today's edition. Bruno is one of my favorite people, really. Bruno Sidler. So he's a long-standing veteran of the logistics industry, one of my favorite characters in the industry, somebody that I've learned a lot from over time. He's had a long career over the years. He worked for many years for Panalpina, where he also served as a CEO for close to 8 years. Subsequently, he served across a few roles in CEVA, executive roles in CEVA, and then as a global COO, Chief Operations Officer for DKSH. Currently, he's involved as the Chief Operations Officer of Loro, which is a privately owned investment company focusing on food and beverage production in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as he sits on the boards of a few logistics-related companies, including Scan Global Logistics, Berchi Group, E2Log, as well as Global Airlift Solutions. So, Bruno, without further ado, great to have you, and awesome that you made the time to be with us today.
Thank you, Rollo. It's my pleasure. I'm always wondering why people like you would invite me to talk about logistics, but, here I am and happy to talk.
Yeah, the 30, 40 years you spent in the industry might be the answer to that, but yes. and also, I forgot to tell everybody that Bruno is actually not in Switzerland. If you look at the Serengeti tree at his back, he's directly from the savannas of Africa with us. So very good connection in Africa. So Bruno, maybe let's start first and foremost with tell us a little bit about, personal journey, right? Personal story. You started a long time ago. How did you even end up in this logistics, many years ago? And how did you end up doing all the things that you did? So maybe just a, 1-2 minute of 40 years career in the industry.
Okay, thank you for this question. And actually, that's what my mom always asked me. Because I have two brothers and they are teachers, and my mom always thinks that they have decent professions, and she never understood what I'm doing. Okay, and I've explained it to her many times, but it never worked. I mean, she still doesn't know what I'm doing, and when people ask her what business I'm in, she doesn't know. Okay, here you go. For me, it was, I always loved different cultures. I loved traveling. So for me, going into freight forwarding was not a difficult choice. And I must say, I loved it from day one. This was really, for me, I found my job from day one. And of course, during my career, I was able to travel and to not just to travel, but also to work abroad. I worked and lived in South Africa, in Nigeria, in Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand. So, it was a great life. It was during the heydays of globalization, where, of course, everything was a lot easier than today. And you could even make money in freight forwarding. So it was a good time. I had a good career, and so it's not surprising that even though I should actually be retired by now, I'm still dangling around doing this logistics game left, right, and center because I love it. It's my life.
Well said. And here's a funny comment that came through. Chaminda, a good friend. He's an industry veteran as well. He said, "My mom thinks I'm loading boxes to trucks." So I guess you're not the only one struggling to explain to your mom what you do, Bruno.
I sympathize.
Well, that's. I mean, this recurring topic. As you know, I'm not from the industry. I kind of happen to parachute myself a lot less years than you did spend. But this storytelling piece, right, where we're kind of explaining to people what the industry does, and also logistics as well as supply chain at large, that is actually a story that almost the whole industry should come together to make it more interesting in the narrative, because well, in some ways COVID has accelerated that storyline, and now people are at least having that impression of supply chain, even president, right, of US talked about supply chain. So I think there's a bit more understanding, at least they hear the term, but we have a long way to go to make it sexy.
No, but I agree with you. I think the COVID, it's obviously not been a very positive experience, but in terms of supply chain logistics is, I think people, the common man on the street has started to realize how important it is. So yeah, it was good advertising. Yeah. But I could have done without it, to be honest.
Yeah, I think all of us. So, now, I want to ask you a little bit about the industry. We got a lot of questions from people that know you, people that don't know you. Obviously, it feels on one side, but also just knowing, and you're very involved. I know a little bit. Let's say the intermittent current at the back end. There's a lot of M&As. There's a lot of acquisitions that have happened, and it seems that it's going to accelerate, if anything else, in the next years. Specifically, how do you see the next couple of years? So one, from an M&A and consolidation perspective, I guess. Two, okay, let me stop there. From an M&A and consolidation, then I ask you the second part.
Okay. Look, I mean, the consolidation in the industry has been going on for a while, but it has certainly, sort of increased in speed as we speak. And out of this came the idea, especially I think the shipping lines are in the forefront of this. Hey, how about creating a one-stop shop type of enterprise where, we don't have an issue anymore with customers having multiple service providers, but they can get everything from us. And the idea is not new. I mean, I remember in the 90s, the banks started to buy insurance companies with the same kind of concept, so that they can offer and provide the customers with everything they need. I personally don't buy into this. I can understand why the shipping lines are pursuing it. They've been very successful. I think when you look into our sectors, the biggest consolidation or the most successful one has happened among shipping lines. You have today probably 6 players which are controlling the market. And, which we can cover that later on when we talk about the current situation, which is predominantly actually triggered by this near monopoly situation. So these people have seen consolidation works. Now let's do it on a different scale. Let's go into air freight, CMA buying aircraft. Let's go into logistics, contract logistics, own warehouses. Just be a one-stop shop to our customers. I'm not so sure that they actually ask the customers about this. I sometimes have the feeling this is sort of driven by the industry rather than actually having the customer in mind. And exactly when you think about COVID, the problems we had in the supply chain throughout COVID, I think they have driven the customer again to have multiple choices. And I know of several examples where people who before have been with one or maybe 2 service providers suddenly started to open up again to 5 or 6 because they felt they couldn't get everything they needed from just 1 or 2. So I'm not so sure that this one-stop shopping, these enormous companies which can cover the globe with everything will be in the end what the customer wants. But that's my humble personal opinion.
I read somewhere, there's a good friend, Ruben. Actually, he sits in Switzerland, and he wrote somewhere, he has an interesting newsletter, and he said something to the extent of, data is great, but have you considered speaking to the client directly and asking the client what they want? So definitely there's a bit of a discrepancy. Now, I'm going to just build a little bit on your point, where in my simple mind, right, I don't even know if the industry, I'm kind of wondering, because if you're going to acquire all this asset or try to acquire, it's a massive undertaking, right? I mean, I don't know if anybody can do it. I mean, they simply don't have the cash, the money to do it, right? If nothing else. But then you have the Amazon, the Alibaba play, which is the Changyao, which is built on a platform, right, where anybody can come in and then they consolidate the data, which is more of a technology play really than an actual them buying the assets play. Whereas Amazon is going actually after actually
Correct.
owning the planes and whatnot. So do you see at some point maybe these guys, right, because they're going to drive more and more and more volumes. E-commerce has been accelerated because of COVID. Do you see at some point these guys kind of playing a very active part in the offering logistics as a service?
Look, I wouldn't rule it out. I mean, you mentioned the prime player in that game, that's Amazon. They have clear ambitions to own the distribution network. And yes, I mean, eventually they could be even interested to open this up for third-party users. I mean, they're also big when you think about the cloud services of Amazon. It's huge, and so they have experience on running networks open for third parties. So I wouldn't rule it out, and I think the industry is very aware of that threat, because Amazon would have the volumes, no doubt, and the cash to really become a big player.
Mm.
But
Yeah,
like with everything, they eventually need to think what they want to be. Do they want to be an e-commerce company, a provider of cloud services, or do they want to be a logistics company? I sometimes think you can't be the jack of all trades. That's my personal view. You have to focus on certain things, and there you have to be the best.
Mm. Yeah, though Amazon has done quite a few things right.
No. Undoubtedly.
They also shot themselves in the foot on a lot of things, but they're very good at fast iteration, right? So, and not only Amazon, but e-commerce or digital first, let's call them, whatever you want to call them, right? This kind of more startup mentality type. And we actually had on a recent podcast Colin Breyer and Bill Carr. So they wrote a book. They both were in Amazon for 15 years. Colin was actually chief of staff of Jeff Bezos, and they documented some of the principles of Amazon. And they were saying that at some point, about 10 years ago, Jeff Bezos himself dedicated his time into digital solution and the cloud when e-commerce was the growing engine of the company and the selling of the books. And he spent 50% of his time on two business units that had zero revenue, zero. But those units eventually now are the cash cows that drive the company. So what I'm also, maybe it's a point, and I'm getting also an interesting question from Chaminda that I will ask you, but let me ask you, there's also a perception that I have that these big companies, let's not name them, right? Whether they're shipping lines, whether they're 3PLs, there's a legacy or there's a certain inertia to move, right? So they know they need to change. They are trying to change. But the rhythm as compared to an Amazon or Alibaba or whatever, Grab, Gojek, Uber, whatever you name it, right, doesn't strike me as being at the same pace, right? So, what's your thoughts on that?
No, I think you're right, and for instance, I've met the startup company recently in London, and these people, are starting up a kind of a forwarding type logistics company, digitalized, completely, greenfield, and none of the people running it was from the forwarding industry. So of course I scratched my head, but they were all ex-Uber guys. So what they really understood was how to drive progress, how to drive development, and speed for them is the most essential thing. So they have the right mindset, and I think they will also be clever enough to bring in talent to, explain to them the industry. But I was quite impressed the way they go about it, and so you've got a point. The Amazons of this world, they have a different approach to things, and they don't mind trying, and they try it out. If it doesn't work, they chuck it out. And whereas sort of we, the old established, we tend to, stick to our own guns. And if we change, we do it in small steps and very, very careful. The jury is still out, whether which model is more successful. But as you say, I mean, today nobody can say anymore Amazon is just burning cash. It has become a cash cow.
Yeah, definitely. Let me pull the question from Chaminda because it's relevant on this point that we've talked about. So, do you think the M&A rush is happening with companies who are late to get into e-commerce and they want to fast track the development, i.e., SF buying Carry, which might be a better, a good example. I'm not so sure Can buying Apex fits that example. But anyways, what do you think, Bruno?
Well, I think it's, as you said, SF buying Carry, yes, that could be a play into e-commerce because Carry is big on fulfillment. But also, don't forget, SF has been looking out for acquisitions for a long, long time, as long as I can remember. And I think they must have paid a very, very hefty price for Carry because they were really desperate to get something. And I also believe, that's my own theory, that they've beaten Kühne Nagel to it. Because I personally believe that the prime target of Kühne was Carry. And they got beaten by SF, and then they settled for Apex. Now, Apex doesn't really bring them anything on fulfillment or e-commerce. I think Kühne was looking for just increasing the presence in Asia and, getting a little bit more air freight tonnage. I have my doubt whether this is a perfect solution for Kühne, because Apex predominantly is a co-loader, and everybody who's worked in Asia in air freight knows that is a very difficult business and not easy to be sort of hosted under the same roof. And so I'm not surprised they're keeping it separately, which then begs the question, what's this all about in the first place? But, the jury is out, but I don't see, that these two acquisitions, maybe the SF one, but certainly Kühne Apex had nothing to do with actually getting what I would call knowledge or a competency they didn't have in-house.
Mm-hmm.
And Kühne, in a way, also, they were in a corner because they made an announcement for so many years that they wanted to make a big acquisition in Asia. So I think there was also a bit of a pressure from the financial markets to deliver.
Yeah. That was indeed another piece of the puzzle. We got a question from Matthew that I'll put out. Slightly different topic, but what will it take for companies to put sustainability ahead of rates in the procurement process? This is, as you know, very hot on the back of a lot of the Fortune 500 companies creating more and more aggressive sustainability goals, carbon neutral goals. I actually know specifically, we had a conversation with a shipping line that is very aggressive on that. There's 3PLs that have criteria from their clients to hit certain things. So what's your take on this?
Well, I think we all know what has been the problem so far is that, everybody talks about sustainability, about, company going green, very appealing. I think everybody buys into that, but very often sustainability or going green came with an additional cost, which nobody wanted to pay. And that's where the problem, became a little bit difficult. You had a customer who said, "Oh, this is absolutely fantastic. If you're using this efficient fuel, which doesn't create as much CO2 as others." But then if you told the same customers, yes, but then your box rate will go up by $500, he didn't think that was good enough. So I think that the issue about sustainability is always to find a way that it doesn't cost more money. And I think there are solutions around this, but it's obviously very, very difficult. And I'm not surprised that the forefront of this initiative is from Scandinavian companies, because I've Scandinavian customers were already talking about sustainability 20 years ago. So the mindset has been always very much around in Scandinavia. And you even had customers there who were actually indeed prepared to pay a couple of more cents to have a sustainable solution. But ultimately, I think it has to be sustainable, but it also has to be cost effective. I don't think we can become sustainable if it's more expensive. I think there we will have a very steep battle to fight.
I think there was Soren Skau came out and said something to the extent that I didn't read sometimes I'm ADHD, so I don't read the full thing, but I think he said something around 8 cents per pair of shoes or something. So in his statement, it was that the consumer ultimately has to bear that cost, right? And would you pay 8 cents more for a pair of shoes? I think that was kind of the gist of it. Maybe I'm getting it wrong. Sorry if I am, but yeah, somebody's got to foot the bill. But I also, it feels a little bit, I'm coming from a generation, my daughter, comes out from school and thinks about recycling, and it's a great thing. And then she's very careful. And I think more and more the young generation is not even the young. I don't know how to define young anymore, right? Whatever, but it's very important. This becomes very important. And to the point where we are willing as consumers more and more to pay for it, depending on, obviously, is it a developed economy or is it a developing? Because in a developing, probably less. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think there is definitely the trend, and the young generation is obviously the one driving it. They're prepared also to make sacrifices, and that's important too. It's not always about that it costs more. Sometimes maybe you also have to consume less or to be more conscious of what kind of a footprint you leave behind. But at the same time, and you touched upon it, there's obviously a big difference between the first world and the second and the third world. When you make $2 a day, sustainability is not at the forefront of your problems. It's about how can I fill my stomach and how can I get a roof over my head. So we have to be careful that we don't leave these people behind just because we can afford to focus on something which, to be fair, also is actually generated mostly by the first world.
Yeah. And there is another question that I think begs to be addressed, and basically it's, you did mention the Uber guys setting up a freight forwarding company without ever been in the industry. I mean, is this digital freight forwarding, right? There's a couple of big examples. Obviously, Flexport has kind of crafted their path into that as the leaders, and there's a few others that have come up. That begs kind of the question that came, which is, do they actually have a future? Is this a fad? This digital freight forwarders versus the, let's say, traditional freight forwarder. I don't have another better term, right? Older, whatever you want to call them, that onboard the digital capability. Because ultimately, right, as long as you have that, you manage to do it in a digital way, then you basically are a digital forwarder, right? So how do you see this? Is it an either or? Is it long term that some will be left behind?
Yeah, look, I mean, okay, Flexport is obviously the prime example because they have attracted a huge valuation. You had SoftBank throwing them $1 billion. So impressive, But when you actually study the business model, I've been kind of disappointed because I always thought they must have this fantastic software which can do just about anything under the sun. And then I started realizing that they are also opening offices or employing people. So I started to wonder what's the spiel here, what's the difference? And to be fair, if you look into the industry players, the traditional ones, the Kühne & Nagels, the DHLs of this world, they've made huge efforts on the digital front because they also realize they have to become more and more efficient. There's huge pressure on, using less people for more files, to put it simple. So I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. But I think the idea that there is somebody out there who's got this fantastic tool which can actually do whatever we all do in the traditional service companies without having people, without having local presence, I think that is just not happening. I think they will have to cross over, they will have to establish a global network, they have to employ people, hopefully because they come from a digital platform from the start, they can do it more efficiently. But the traditional ones, they're not standing still. They're coming to the other side. They're also trying out how can they become more efficient, what can they automate, what can they push to the customers and stuff like that. So I think there's not going to be an either or. The truth is in the middle.
Mm-hmm. And on this topic of digital, I mean, obviously it's a services industry. For freight forwarding 3PL, it's a services industry, it's a people's industry. The question that came, and very good question, is do you see the freight forwarder of tomorrow still needing the client rapport skills, sales skills, communication, building relationship skills, or will we be hiring more digital and data scientists?
Look, I think ultimately the way the human beings are functioning today, you will still need a local presence, somebody who is interfacing on a local level. Maybe in the local branch, you don't need all the things you have today. I think it will be reduced to customer service and sales. But that I just cannot see that you can do away with that. Until maybe there's one day a generation who feels comfortable interacting with machines or interacting with a central office somewhere like what you have today with the call centers. Maybe that's happening, but I don't see it. I think people still want to talk to somebody who is from their neighborhood, who knows the lay of the land, who is familiar with themselves, with their products, and so on. So I just can't see that you can do away with that. Human beings, they want to interact with other human beings, and you enjoy interacting with somebody you know and somebody you trust. And logistics, it's a lot about trusting. Okay. But why do you give somebody your shipments? Because you trust that this person can do the job, can deliver. And that I don't think you can ever replace. But who knows? Maybe we see the rise of a new generation of people who feels extremely comfortable with electronic tools, with interfacing even maybe one day with robots and machines. I wouldn't.
I mean, I need to throw this question because now COVID has forced us, depending on where we are and, to different degrees, but has forced us to lockdowns, work from home, yada, yada, yada. So that human to human, let's meet, let's build trust via the, for lack of a better word, conventional face-to-face or, human contact has moved digitally as well. We actually had 2 or 3 clients within 3PLs that, even if it's not really our offering for now, we are now developing it. They asked us, how do we sell online, Radu? How do we do the storytelling piece? Because now, I mean, clients, you don't just go to their office or you go and have a beer, or you can't, like literally you can't. So what do? You just hope for COVID to pass and then you start selling again. You cannot do that, right? So
I agree.
It's also the sales and the building of relationship has moved or is transitioning somehow to this digital front. How I mean, I guess I'll stop here. That's just my observation. Maybe you tell me also what you observe.
Well, I think at the moment we're still living on credit. I also don't have a problem running my businesses through video conferences, but I'm dealing with people I know already. Okay, so to be fair, I've made some interactions with people I don't know, but that has been more transactional. It's not been on a sales job. But I guess it's also possible to build up a relationship when you talk to somebody frequently over a video conference. But is it really the same? I don't know. But I think we all have been surprised how easy it has become. But I often think we're living on credit. Also with my people, I can feel now it's starting to be strained. After talking over video and telephone over 1 year, I think we're all yearning for that personal contact again, to really feel the people. How are they really? Not just the face you see on the screen. And I think there is a time limit on how long you can do this before things start to break.
Most likely they've already. I mean, we're likely to see a pretty significant mental health pandemic. It's already kind of happening. No, I mean, absolutely, we are social animals at the end of the day, social beings, not animals, social beings. So, that fine line, we'll see how it it plays out in the long term. I just want to also ask you a little bit on this piece of customer centricity, right? So again, back to Amazon, the whole philosophy is customer first. You mentioned that a lot of these companies forget the customer. The bigger they are, the further away. I mean, I know, you probably know, you've been a CEO as well. I know C-level executives that have not met clients for years, which is damn dangerous, right? I mean, it's like so stupid. So how do you know? So I guess how do you maintain and you have this 100 years old, 50 years old, 30 years old, whatever it is, right? Companies that after a while they become successful in their own way, but then it becomes an entanglement of internal politics and fights and building their own kingdoms and whatever it is. So I'm curious, if you've lived in these corporate environments, are there some ways in which to avoid it? Or are there some principles that you found more successful to make sure that you don't forget who's paying your bills, which is your client, and you always remember to ask the client what they need?
Well, I think you said it, and at least that's how I was running Panalpina. I saw customers every week. For me, that was also, leading by example, to show my people it's important to meet customers. And I got tremendous help from meeting customers. You get a very clear feedback whether what you think is a good idea actually works for your customers, or whether you're just doing something where you think it's great, or you build up, central overheads because you think, oh, we need somebody doing that, we need somebody doing this. And at the end, nobody asks the question, yeah, but what does it deliver to the customer? So all I can say is a C-level executive who doesn't meet customer is just stupid. That's, first of all, he set a great example. Secondly, I think the customer appreciates very much to talk to a C-level executives, and you get great feedback free of charge, which is going to make you and your company better. So to me, that was always something I couldn't understand, that C-level executives or any executive wouldn't go and meet customers. It's a must.
Yeah. We're getting, Sushil is asking, so he's a fervent listener, so I'll summarize because he asked two questions, but if I can summarize a little bit, is more or less, his question is, what do you see as the technologies or the trends that will make the most impact in the industry? So I'll throw some buzzwords at you: AI, machine learning, data, blockchain, whatever, put it in that category. So what will make the most impact? And I will ask which of these buzzwords, just as a challenge to you, you think is too much spoken about and will have zero to limited impact.
Yeah, look, I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm at the forefront of the technological development in the industry, but I think we still haven't overcome simple issues. It's the famous interfacing. A lot still is entered manually. And done on emails, even on faxes. I think we have scratched the surface. Some are better than others, but by and large, this industry is still driven to a large extent on manual intervention, and that has to stop. And the tools are there, but of course it needs great discipline, because you have to do all this stuff which is not sexy at all, cleaning out your master data, standardize your processes. And when I say standardize your processes, I mean the back office ones. I don't mean don't standardize your sales and your customer service processes. They have to remain pretty individual, But there, of course, you have a conflict as well. On the one hand, you want this super efficient machine, doing as many shipments per person as possible. So on the other hand, you want to allow your customers to really pick and choose whatever suits him the best. And that of course, is not always possible. And that's where sometimes the big boys have a problem, because they don't want to have too much customization from the customer side. And, again, the customer wants to have a certain service, and then he doesn't care about the service provider standards. Okay, but I think there's still a lot of room to do in terms of automating very simple processes, interfacing between shipping lines, forwarders, warehouses, truckers. Everybody talks about it, but only a few have really mastered it. And I probably think the most advanced are still, and they were already 20 years ago, were the integrators. But of course, we know the integrators limit themselves to a certain size of parcels. So that's not an answer for everything. But at least I think they are very advanced when it comes to automatization.
And it makes economic sense for the rates that you pay in that context. But there was a point that I wanted to mention. So I actually had the conversation today with a senior executive from a large software company, supply chain software. And I was talking, look, I mean, in recent times, you can talk about digital brain, you can talk about, integrated business planning, SNOP, you can talk about, master data, visibility, AI, and all of that. But if you really cannot get your, simple example, a large FMCG company, if they couldn't get their ingredients from India before the India lockdown came into place, they would have had to change the whole formulation, all the chemicals, everything would have had to. So if that logistics piece had failed them, which it didn't, but just saying, if that failed, then the whole thing would have been screwed up, right? Now, obviously, COVID doesn't happen every day, but my point to the executive was that, yeah, and this was also a question that I got from one of the logistics professionals that follows us. His point was, you talk a lot about digital, but ultimately, if you don't have a good transport and logistics professional who knows the right people to call, the right relationships, the right freighters, the right contracts, the right making things happen, you're still kind of screwed with all your data. So I'm curious to hear your perspective on that.
No, I couldn't agree more. You can have the most sophisticated system in the world, but if you don't have the little guy in Hong Kong loading the right pallet into the aircraft, you can bang your keyboard all day long. It's not going to happen. So I also think there is probably a limit to what can be done with digitize the supply chain. Ultimately, you still need people. And you need the right people on the ground with the right attitude to make it happen. So it's not that simple. I think, with all the hype around technology, we sometimes forget the impact on having motivated people working for us, the culture of a company. It's still there, and it's as important as yesterday. You cannot, take it away just by having everything digitized.
On the people front, a question that came through is, many years, you've obviously been an executive for many years. Any secret sauce, secret advice, maybe not secret, but any advice in terms of getting teams working together well, getting senior execs coming together as a team and not fighting with each other, I guess, some leadership tips and tricks?
Well, I can ask another question. Can you learn to be a leader? I don't think so. I think it starts with your upbringing. Yes, you can become better by going to courses. You can learn techniques, but that still doesn't make you a leader. I think it comes with your inherited social competence, and that social competence should help you, to determine how to put teams together. I mean, you will know your people. This one has this strength and this weakness. Those two don't see eye to eye. Don't put them into the same team. But I think it has to come naturally. I just don't think you can learn it. You can enhance it. Obviously, experience. If you've been a leader for many years, you can try out a lot of things and you know what works, what doesn't work. But I think the base ingredient, the social competence that you've inherited from your parents, at a very early stage. It probably happens in the first 10 years of your life. And then, if somebody hasn't got it, if they didn't suck it in with their mother milk, you can send them to 100 courses. They will never become a good leader. I'm sorry. It sounds a bit devastating, but I've always said the same thing about salespeople. Somebody who doesn't know how to sell, you can send him to dozens of courses. He will still not be able to convince a customer to buy from him. He knows all the techniques in the world, but he just doesn't have the personality. He doesn't know how to react in different situations. So, for me, social competence, so social intelligence, is the key ingredient for a successful leader. The rest you can learn, but that is given to you maybe partly by your DNA, but also mostly by your upbringing.
And you've been CEO, right? You've run big companies, and this came through a few cluster head leaders or regional CEOs, right? What would be some advice looking back, right, into people that are for the first time stepping into a C-level role or executive role? Any, again, tips and tricks? But okay, don't talk about natural leaders again, Bruno. Can you be more pragmatic? Assume they are leaders.
Yes. I'm sorry, maybe it's again too simple, but I mean, ultimately, you have to throw people into the cold water. You can give them all the tips. You can give them books and say, "Oh, we should read this book. This is really fantastic." And the libraries are are flooded with management books about how to be a good leader, how to fix issues and what have you. But ultimately, you have to throw somebody into cold water, and he has to, it's learning by doing. You can help him. And I think that's what it's important, that when you throw somebody into the cold water, that he has somebody, a mentor, or somebody he can actually interface with when he has an issue. That's very helpful. But the rest, you can't take it away from him. The day comes where you have to say, boy, now you're on your own. Now go and make it happen. Doesn't mean you have to leave him alone. He should be always reachable. And if you don't hear from him, reach out to him and make sure that he's fine. But that's all you can do. There's no this special recipe which you can give somebody, this blueprint. If you follow this blueprint, you will be successful. No. It's the same with business plans or strategy, you know. It's all done very well with the best of meaning, but, you know, then you hit the first problem and it just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, there's no franchise. There's no McDonald's for leaders, because then it would be a very boring.
Exactly. But what I really want to say is, important is when you send people for the first time into these roles, don't leave them alone. You know, be there and make sure they actually reach out to you. And if they don't, you have to be the one who is pinging them. Hey, I haven't heard from you. Everything fine? And fine means everything. It doesn't just mean what he does for you. Also check out whether his family is okay, you know, especially when you move into new countries. Is the wife okay? Kids are okay in the new school? Things like that. You know, there you can do a lot to make him successful. But for the rest, he really has to do it himself, you know.
And on the topic of the week, right, which we're in, you know, how do we challenge or change also the gender balance at the C-level in supply chain organizations? I guess supply chain, logistics is even more. 3PLs are even in most countries. There are some interesting examples. I guess, you know, in China there's offices with only women, or Vietnam. So there's certain markets where it's quite interesting, the dynamics. But in most, it's a male-dominated industry, right? So how do you see this type of dynamics playing out? How can we encourage more women in leadership positions or groom them?
I think you're right. You know, that we obviously, as an industry, we had a certain image. You know, probably came from the real basics in the industry. You know, the drivers, the warehouse men, who were obviously rough people, who didn't always have the a nice language. So that created this thing about this is a sort of an industry where it's predominantly run by men. I think that's really bullshit. And you mentioned the best example, Asia. All of us who have worked in Asia, we had so many women in key positions, and and very, very often they were the better managers than the guys. Okay, so I think as a C-level executive today, you know, it should not be just today, but as always, hopefully, you have to make it your job to support women. And it starts with you, the way you talk about women, and also the way you interfere. If you hear, you know, the guys cracking the usual jokes, it's just not on anymore. You know, it starts how we speak to each other. And sometimes, yes, it probably needs a bit an extra effort to give the women a chance. But I think women in our industry, I mean, there are tons of examples, are great. They're absolutely at par. The rest is nonsense. It's just that people, you know, should maybe wake up and realize it's 2021.
Yeah. that's a very useful advice. Yeah, and common sense is not that common, so it's all in it's all in the spirit.
Yeah, and we were this macho industry, you know. Let's face it, and we celebrated it, you know. Well, we are the tough guys, you know. But that's over.
And there's definitely some toughness is not a gender. I mean, it's not a gender thing. I mean, I have a daughter, I have a son, and I mean, it's each and every one of us. I guess it's a long journey, right? Obviously, we all have our own biases that we know,
Sure.
some of them don't, and it's a journey for all of us. But yeah, I think actually we're getting there. I think again on the youth, the hope is on the youth. They are demanding it, they are asking for it, they are very vocal about it, which is great. And also this perception, I think the overall, not only perception, but there's very clear targets, behaviors that have changed in the last couple of years, have accelerated. Still a long way to go. A lot of ceilings have been broken. Obviously, we have the vice president of US, first time woman. There's a lot of examples in all walks of life. This is not a logistics only consideration.
And for the better, Radu, for the better.
Yeah. Well, on that note, Bruno, we have a lot more questions, but I'll take you separately, and you see if you have time to address some of them. It's been a pleasure to have you. Thanks for making the time. Stay healthy. Keep sharing and inspiring people, and never retire. Actually, because I think people like you are priceless. And one of these days, I'm going to write a book where I ask you to contribute with all the stories from the industry, because you have a lot of gems from from the good old days, from the history of what was before, but also what created what is today. So thanks for sharing some of that today, and looking forward to having you again soon.
My pleasure, Radu. It's been great. Thank you so much.